too much of phlebotomy will roll you the ferritin and you're going to feel crap. So very tired, very fatigued.
But that seems to be something that's going along, probably more common in that population.
People that are actually treating breast cancer and prostate cancer with estradiol, and it's improving.
They had to try to make a negative story about hormones and demonize the hormones which are so integral to our bodies.
And if you weren't drug testing, it was a frowny face.
Some of the studies show that some women don't get symptomatic relief or improvement until they're over 100 or 200 or even higher.
So where do you think the police would go to investigate steroid trafficking?
Optimal testosterone levels is cardioprotective, and we now absolutely know that detriment to your heart.
A vegan diet, which I don't agree with that, you don't have the synthesis of the proteins.
Why do we go? So questions from the audience. We threw a lot of questions. Anyone?
Is there a correlation or cause of low D3 levels and testosterone? Is there a correlation?
So he's asking, is there a correlation between low D3 levels and testosterone? And I mean, yes, I think the panel's saying yes. I mean, we tested on our blood panel because before someone starts TRT, if they're low in D3, that would be a good thing to sort out to get it optimized. I would think. What would you do?
I totally agree. You need adequate D3 to make hormones. So if your D3 is low, and for me, an optimal D3 is somewhere between 80 and 110. A normal D3 is considered 25 to, so basically you have to make sure that your D3 is in an optimal range, at least 60 if you really want to optimize around 80. So D3 is critically important and low in so many people.
Yeah, D3 is implemented in my, let's say, hormonal boostment regimen. And because it's a steroid molecule, everything comes from cholesterol. Low cholesterol means low testosterone, low D3. So by implementing D3, I use enclomiphene or mesterolone or boron or DHEA and zinc, it helps dramatically to increase your own production.
Another question in the back.
What would be probably your biggest remark in response to those people who seem to share that belief that hormone replacement therapy is going to cause cancer, and that myth that we start to hear super frequently, especially online?
In women or in men?
So completely disproven. The Women's Health Initiative has now been completely, even the authors of the study, which was one of the most detrimental studies to women's health ever, came forward and said this was misinterpreted data. It was, in fact, the study showed that estradiol helped prevent breast cancer and ovarian cancer, that it was only the progestins, the artificial progesterone, that was linked to cancer. Completely now, and unfortunately that study ruined a whole lot of people's lives and continues to ruin a whole lot of people's lives. There's zero evidence to support that estradiol or progesterone cause cancer, and a lot of evidence to support that they prevent it. We already talked about the prostate cancer link to testosterone, which again, there was 2 cases that prompted that whole thing. The case of whether we should be using testosterone replacement in men who have been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Dr. Morgentaler has also talked about that as well, that we can safely do that as well, even in men who have had prostate cancer, still utilizing testosterone therapy. And we'll have the conversation with them. Lots of times it's very hard to get their doctors to sign off, and they won't do it. And the same thing's true about women who have breast cancer and have a history of, for instance, estrogen-positive breast cancers. Can we use estrogen? You might be able to use it if you, in my belief, you can help them, but you're going to be fighting a lot of conventional wisdom that would say don't do it. So we have a long conversation with our women, and we follow metabolites closely, and we use certain types of estrogen in those cases.
Yeah, I'll second that. Betsy's absolutely right. And if anything, it's going. A lot of physicians are usually going the other direction. They looked at a newer study showing that a lot of men with a normal PSA, up to 13 to 20%, have an inherent prostate cancer, and they're all on testosterone. So it's actually being used to treat prostate cancer, as per Morgentaler. Same with the WHI, like Dr. Ure said. A lot of those women actually had breast cancer already, and they were treated, and they actually did better. And there's some people that are actually treating breast cancer and prostate cancer with estradiol, and it's improving because this was done over 50 years ago. It kind of got pushed aside with chemotherapy. In Ohio, there's a Dr. Rebecca Glazer is actually treating women with breast cancer with testosterone. And some physicians are starting to use estradiol and testosterone to treat cancer. So if anything, it reduces the risk of cancer, but absolutely does not cause it.
I suppose between the Women's Health Initiative, and I think that goes back to the point what we started with, is the stigma around all hormones. And it seems like in the research community, for whatever reason in the past, they had to try to make a negative story about hormones and demonize the hormones, which are so integral to our bodies. How could something that's so integral to your body be the cause of your demise? And I think we're learning now that this isn't the case, and that you can be on hormones safely.
If you guys know a lot of questions out or numbers out about men's testosterone from a woman's perspective, from your guys' practice, I know every woman is different. I know you can't do generic numbers, but for you guys, if you were trying to target a woman, what would be your optimal range lab-wise? Like what kind of? I mean, I know looking at symptoms, things like that. Where are you trying
Yeah, there's a big range with free testosterone. 3 to 4 or 5, somewhere in that range. Again, it varies. Totals. Some of the studies show that some women don't get symptomatic relief or improvement until they're over 100 or 200 or even higher. But again, it depends on their sensitivity. Some women need lower, some women need higher. So again, it's a range, and again, goes by their symptoms and how they're responding.
Yeah, just real quick, circling back to the D3 thing. That kid is selling.
In June, I was doing 5,000 IU a day and bumped up to 10,000. I was also taking high vitamin C, and I think there was a bunch of contributing factors maybe that caused that. But in that case, do you see that risk with kidney stone supplementing D3 if you do injectable? And what other, I guess the sun obviously I think is the best source of vitamin D, but even at 5 to 10,000 IU a day for the long term, I don't think my vitamin D was much like 50. So maybe a gut health issue, you kind of touched on that earlier, but any suggestions in general in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, you could just need more natural sunlight because there's D3, and then there's all the metabolites of D3. You make sure your K2 is optimized, and then there's, of course, dietary things, right? Gut issues. A lot of people, urologists will put men on or women on certain diets to prevent kidney stones, different things like that. So definitely look at the gut.
Dehydration.
Being dehydrated.
Right. I think you have to know what kind of stone it is, because if it's calcium oxalate stone. So you'd have to look at were you taking K2 with your D3? That's really critically important. And then looking at magnesium as well, because all those things are going to regulate that calcium metabolism. So make sure your magnesium levels that you had red blood cell magnesium above 6.5, for instance. This can help that too.
So as you talked about the hemoglobin and red blood cell count and not being concerned, being in that approximate Q to 5 range, but not used to. So, not to make a joke of it, but my doctor is super concerned with her. Obviously, finding another doctor would be maybe a good alternative.
I've done the nattokinase, and I've had some luck with that in lowering it. Anything you'd be concerned with doing that, or is that a pretty acceptable thing to try to lower that?
Nattokinase works like the aspirin, it's a bad drug. So it just deactivates the platelets, and it's an anticoagulation method. Now, if you follow a zero red meat diet, obviously you don't have the substrate, which is iron and folic acid, in order to synthesize hemoglobin. And presumably, if you follow a vegan diet, which I don't agree with that, you don't have the synthesis of the proteins. Now, too much of phlebotomy will roll you the ferritin, and you're going to feel crap, so very tired, very fatigued. I think going to microdose and break it down the dose by the cream has less impact on the EPO and on the hemoglobin rather than injecting one single dose every week.
I will add that I like nattokinase, actually, for a lot of reasons, beyond some of its blood thinning effects. It maybe has a very nice effect for a spike protein as well, which unfortunately we're measuring spike protein levels in people and almost everybody's high. So I think that there's some actually significant benefits to nattokinase even beyond some of its fibrinolytic effects. So I'm a fan of it. I would continue taking it.
Have you run into the ironic situation where if you have a 52, a 53, a 54, a 55 hematocrit, and you go to do a phlebotomy to simply donate blood, the phlebotomist will tell you, oh, no, we can't take your blood. And so you're sent away because of that kind of a reading.
Blood donation is prohibited because you cannot transfuse this blood because it's very thick. to somebody who has, for instance, heart failure because his heart cannot pump efficiently that sticky blood. But obviously you get phlebotomized and the blood is wasted, okay? So nobody gets your blood. So you need to get rid of this extra blood. And I've seen cases of 21 hemoglobin, 62 hematocrit. Of course, this is not healthy, but I think you should watch out your hemoglobin. Over 18 usually is a sign when you need to go. Until 17.5, I think it's within the range.
I mean, there are some benefits to phlebotomy, right? I mean, we actually know from a longevity perspective that when people phlebotomize, they actually have better longevity. So I'm actually a fan of doing phlebotomy now and then. You're right. My men, when they get above 18, I recommend it. I've had to write letters twice for patients, not that often, where they wouldn't take their blood, and I had to explain. So I had to write a letter to explain they won't take the blood, right? Right, they won't take the blood because I don't actually have my patients go for phlebotomy. I have them go donate blood. It's just simpler. And so there are cases where they will not take it because their hematocrit is high. And so I've had to send them back with a letter explaining it, and then it worked to have that letter. But yeah, it's most of the time, though, I've not had that happen. But I have had 2 patients who have to go in with a stupid letter to actually get them to take the blood. But I actually
it is because of the stigma of testosterone. For instance, if you're a heavy smoker and you have sleep apnea, you have hematocrit 55.
So they think that something's wrong with you, and you have to write that nothing's wrong with this person, and this reason. But I also don't demonize the blood donation thing because I think there's some health benefits to it as long as you don't push ferritin low.
I think one of the studies out of Australia about getting rid of forever chemicals was frequent donation of blood.
Right, exactly. It actually kind of is just so you make new blood cells. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's all the TRT groups, and I follow all the things on social media, and it's kind of like with there's like an emphatic don't give blood, never give blood, and I think it's almost a knee-jerk reaction to, I guess, this fear around the elevated hematocrit hemoglobin, and I think what on the one group that's being emphatic about never giving blood is that, well, let's not go crazy about the hematocrit hemoglobin within a certain range, but you can also have high ferritin levels, and really high ferritin levels aren't great either, and that's the best time to give blood. And obviously you don't want too low a ferritin, so you have to be smart about it. It has to be focused, and it can't be absolutes either way. So that's what I think. But there's another question back there, I thought. Yeah.
Prevalence of younger males in the 20 plus started to do TRT or things like that. Have you seen any studies in terms of like the long-term metabolic cardio health, where the difference between natural testosterone versus TRT in younger males now that it's become more prevalent than you've done?
I don't think we have the studies yet on that, but we do absolutely know that having optimal testosterone levels is cardioprotective. And we now absolutely know that the detriment to your heart and cardiovascular system is starting early in your 20s. It would certainly make sense to me that if we are replacing testosterone in these males who are low in their 20s, it should have a cardioprotective effect in the long term. But the studies aren't there yet.
I mean, I'm a case sample of one. I started TRT when I was 22, and now I'm 51. And, I think
look how good he looks.
I've fared pretty well, so, But there's all sorts of bumps along the way, right? I mean, there's certain things that, can happen throughout your life and your health unrelated to your testosterone as well. And perhaps having the testosterone there buffers you against the frailty and other issues. And a lot of young men, I think this is really important too, is there's a concern. There's, I've got to be on something for the rest of my life. I mean, you don't have to be, but you end up not feeling as optimally when on it versus off of it. So you end up just continuing it. But there are lots of, treatments that you just stay on. And I've always said, I don't like to be thought of as the patient who's sickly, that's on medication. To me, it's better to think of it in the sense that I'm, improving my longevity and my health span. And unfortunately, I live in an era when that's both acceptable and available. So that's how I, from a young person on into someone in 51, have been able to view it in that light.
I was talking to somebody at the break, and I'd like you guys' comments on this. Who said, I feel exactly the same with my testosterone 500 versus 1500. So should I be taking it if I feel exactly the same? And my answer to that is, I think there's so many things. Like I feel the same on hormones, off hormones, but I think I know all the beneficial things it's doing for my health, is still ample reason to be optimizing the levels. What would you guys' comments, and why does he not feel better on a 500 versus a 1500?
Yes, I mean,
And he's an otherwise healthy guy who's eating well, who looks very fit and is doing everything right.
yeah, I mean, so many questions. Because some people, when they go on the testosterone thing, I'm supposed to feel something. They think it's a stimulant. And in certain cases, we've seen patients that even with the testosterone scrotal cream, it almost seems like a stimulant because they can't fall asleep, and some of them get wired, and some of them have this increase in neurotransmitters. I mean, maybe there's something in the brain that is not as sensitive as the other person. Maybe it's their androgen receptor. Maybe they need to have even higher doses than what they're on. Some guys even do better on smaller doses, because if you give them too much, they don't feel good. So, yeah, I've come across this a few times as well. We come across some patients that say, I didn't feel any better. And we always think it's down to expectations, because when they've stopped the treatment, because sometimes say, well, why are we spending all this money on this treatment, and then stop it? And then they come back to us 6 months later. I said, yeah, you know what? I get a big bit of a paunch. My stomach has got to here now, and my metabolic health isn't great, because in their minds they were expecting this, to be an Adonis or Superman in bed, and those things may not have happened. But what they didn't realize behind the scenes is they found it easier to put on muscle mass, decrease body fat, and their metabolic health was better. And they didn't realize it until they stopped it. So, yeah, it was probably one of those scenarios.
I had 2 cases of people that went to jail before using this. They were using testosterone. They were convicted. They went for a felony in jail, and they had to stop obviously testosterone because they didn't approve it. And they told me how much drained and lousy they felt, and they had to restart even a few months afterwards. So it's like pulling off the plug and emptying your batteries. There's no energy for life.
There's also this phenomenon that the media has been, I think it's being called is test maxing, this whole test maxing thing, which is, 20-somethings who are like, I want to go on TRT, but there's no medical need. It's just what used to be called juicing, what used to be called taking a steroid cycle. Just maybe not in quite the same super physiologic doses, but it has the same endogenous suppression of endogenous production of hormones and all the same issues. But that seems to be something that's going along, probably more common in that population than the actual medical need for somebody 22 years old to really be on TRT. It seems like TRT has just been, the acceptance of TRT has made it kind of okay, if you call it test maxing, to do a cycle of gear.
I would wonder, though, if they were actually deficient and either not tested, but jumping on the bandwagon, because you are impressionable when you're younger. I mean, I remember when I was 22, it was a Newsweek article, I don't know if you remember that, with the testosterone patches that had arrived around 1995 and 96. That was a big new delivery system for testosterone through these patches, 2 on your back. And that, I was very impressionable then, and I thought, what is this testosterone about? And okay, and you look at the tick box of symptoms, and okay, I got that maybe, or let's get tested. That was my thought, because I did not want to go down the route of just for the physical performance or go to the gym. I promised my grandfather I would never do drugs, and that was not the route I was going to go. Because that was the 80s. I was don't just say no. Yeah. But the point is, you can be impressionable, and I think, but many of the young people, and like myself, as it turns out, had low testosterone and found benefit in it. And I think almost instinctively, they might seek it out, but for both reasons: one, for the look or vanity, but 2, because maybe there really is a problem, and that's how they're measuring up to their peers.
And maybe now I'm seeing a skewed population, Rick, but I'm getting a lot more young people in my clinic now, especially since COVID. With these kind of long COVID symptoms. So maybe that's a skewed population, but 80% of them in their 20s are having low testosterone. It's that high. So unfortunately, COVID did a huge number on testosterone function. So I do think probably there is a lot of 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds who do have low testosterone, and it is never checked. And maybe that self-dosing or going after the test vaccine is
Actually,
is
they've been denied to test the testosterone even though you have symptoms. They say, oh, you have a bear, you don't need to
Right,
check
right.
out your testosterone. Oh, you're muscular. Silly facts, okay, silly points.
nobody will even check it on them, right?
And eventually they get tested. They are low testosterone. Now what you have to say that you stop me for checking out my testosterone?
But I think that's also depending on where one lives. I mean, we know in the Nordic countries, they look very down upon anyone using testosterone to the point where the police will look at you. If you look more muscly than you ought to, they'll follow you back home and to see if you have a prescription for a testosterone, and their healthcare systems don't recognize it. So we get loads of patients from Nordic countries wanting to have treatment because they know about the deficiencies in the rest of the world, in the rest of Europe and America and the United Kingdom, but aren't getting treated in those countries. And we see that again on the NHS because of the burden on the public sector and the extra cost. So they do treat HRT, but even there's a wait list for treatment. So I think it's important that people don't get denied, but that knowing that there are other alternatives besides either your insurance-based system, like in the US, or your NHS system, that you can go to private clinics and get treated rather than having to go to the guy down at the gym.
It's funny you bring that up because I was talking to Lacey about that before. There was a period of time where in certain Scandinavian countries, gyms were divided into those that tested for anabolic steroids and those that did not test. And there would be a sign put up on the door of a gym that tested with a smiley face. And if you weren't drug testing, it was a frowny face. So where do you think the police would go to investigate steroid trafficking? So, and apparently these Scandinavian countries are very, very much anti-testosterone, anti-androgens. And so there was somewhat of a celebrated case in Sweden where there was this, young man who was walking down the street in Sweden, and a attractive woman came up to him and said, wow, you've got some big trapezius muscles. And he was like, yeah, I do. And whatever Swedish, accent he used. And she's like, well, come with me. And she walked him to the local police station and forced him to take a drug test. And the theory was that his muscularity provided probable cause to require him to submit to a urine sample as to whether or not he was using illegal drugs. And it wound up, he passed the test. Kid just had huge traps. And so it was in the local papers, and it got some international recognition of whether that should be a basis for probable cause, in the same way that if cop stops you on the street, roll down your window, you're in your car, he says, let me see your license. He looks at your eyes. You've got bloodshot eyes. You've got a glassy quality to them. Your face is red. You look disheveled. Those are all indicia of the use of alcohol. So probable cause to arrest you for drunk driving can come out of that. That same theory was used in Sweden.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful round table.
Watch our channel for more interesting information like this. But if you do want a more breakdown of real science versus media fear-mongering, subscribe, drop me a like, and share this with someone. And check us out on Instagram, TikTok, and now on Spotify. You can listen to content like this.